Hello, everyone. I'm Isaac, and welcome to Isaac and Friends. Now, with the major success of Space Marine 2, a lot of people have been getting a lot more interest in trying to start the Warhammer tabletop game. Now, as a veteran player that has been playing around since 6 or 7 off and on, I'm going to show you a few things about what you might be able to do to first start your army. Now, the first thing I'm going to recommend, as any player worth their salt is going to recommend before you start buying any models for an army, is one of these. This, ladies and gentlemen, is called a codex. This is your army's book, and I'm going to be running Space Marine Army for a lot of example because this is what I am primarily aware of and know how to run. I've also run Astra Militarum, which is commonly referred to as the Imperial Guard as well, but this is our primary example. Excuse me for a minute while I move the mic here. There we go, now it's not in our way. You'll want one of these. Every faction in Warhammer 40k has one. It gives you lore, and again, it gives you all the nifty little data sheets for your units, telling you what they do, all that stuff. Really good to have. Now, this is imperative to have. You'll also want a copy of the rulebook. Now, there's two options with the copies of the rulebook. You can either buy the extremely expensive starter set, which comes with a small smattering of Space Marines and Tyranids, as well as a set of the rules. You can also go to warhammer.com, go to the community section of the website, and download the full rule book right there at the site. Now, it won't have any of the cool lore bits. It just has the flat out rules. It tells you how to play the game, what different keywords mean, both for weapons and for units, and that's it. So it's a straightforward, easy thing of going, okay, I don't want to deal with a ton of lore. I just want to learn how to play. There you go. Now, well, building an army, especially for 10th edition, like I said before, this is important. Your faction's codex gives you lore on the faction and all that stuff, as I've already said. Now, one of the first things you're going to want when you're first starting out is one of these little dudes. This is a Space Marine Terminator Captain. Now, this is one of the guys you get in the actual starter set. Each army has an HQ unit like this guy. Now, you can even get specialized HQ units. I'm going to put him right back where he is with all his boys. For example, you can also purchase upgraded versions like Robo Girly Man or Robote Gilliman. I play Ultramarine, so yes, I have no problems with getting made fun of, so it's how it is. You can also, of course, get Marnius Calgar, which you'll also see in the Space Marine 2 game. Now, each faction has similar named characters like that. Each of them is going to have special abilities and special buffs they can give your army, which is why getting a command unit is so important. Now, in earlier editions, you had to have, for your army composition to be able to play, you had to have one command character and 2 troop units. That's not the same in 10th edition. 10th edition has various army building rules. You can have what they have called combat patrols, which you'll also find in your books. Pull up the combat patrol for the Space Marines real quick for you. Like this. Strike Force Octavius. Now, it'll tell you what the Strike Force composes of. In this case, 5 Infernus Squad models, 1 Captain Octavius, 1 squad of Terminators, and a Librarian. It even gives you some nifty-difty little painting tips. Each book is going to have, of course, their own version of this. So if you want to take a look at it, I definitely recommend it. And each combat patrol also comes with their own little set of rules, which you're going to want to study, pay attention to. Now, there are also cool stuff that you can also use, especially once you decide to get away from your combat patrol. You can also get these new various rules and new detachment rules for Space Marines. Space Marines have detachments, while other armies most certainly will have different army rules or different concepts of how your army is supposed to work. The most common thing for Space Marines is going to be the Gladius Task Force, which is basically a catch-all Space Marine group that you can use. Which, with the new rules, pretty much you can, as long as you have, let's say, a command unit, you can smatter whatever you want as long as you're willing to pay the points for it. Which, your points for your army kind of determines how powerful it is. Most average games are going to be about 2,000 points. And you'll find point value costs, by the way, at the back of your book. So at the very back, you're going to find your point values, and it's going to tell you what units you have available, how much it's going to cost for those units. Now, in the past, what's interesting is each unit would actually have individual costs for their upgrades. So, for example, a tactical squad, which used to be the primary troop unit, in fact, the only troop unit for Space Marines. Yeah, compared to what they have now, Space Marines used to have not a lot for options in terms of tactical choices and troop build in your army. Now, a lot of people that I have heard online will still try and say, oh, you should totally start with the tactical Marines because they're essentially the bread and butter of what the Space Marines used to be. And I'm going to honestly say, as someone who is kind of a veteran who's been playing off and on for a while, having to rebuild my army from scratch, which, by the way, if you want to help me out with that or want to give Uncle Isaac a little bit of money for his minis, why don't you can also help us out by using our code INF10 for our buddies and partners at W.GG. W is a great energy drink company. They actually do really well. They make some awesome energy drinks. I've tried pretty much all their flavors. I've never been disappointed. So hey, anything you can do to help the channel is welcome. I'm absolutely happy for that. If you want to feed my Warhammer habit, please do. But I would actually argue that you should probably, instead of getting a tactical squad, think about getting some intercessors instead. And the reason why I say this is for every 10 Marines in a tactical squad, yes, you can swap out for a heavy weapon. But at the same time, if I'm really going to say it, tactically speaking, why would I take a bunch of guys with bolters to just swap out one for a heavy weapon when in the current iteration with Space Marines, you can just get a whole squad armed with that weapon? Like, people tend to give the Space Marines and the starter kit a hard time, but really it's actually a pretty interesting deal. Especially if you can piece together some more Infernus squads up to a 10-man squad. Considering that the Infernus weapon is, in this D6 system, pretty nasty. Especially when you get a whole bunch of them together. They're a D6 auto hit, ignoring cover, and they can also force the opponent to take a battle test. And what that means is, on average, you're going to get at least somewhere around 25 to 30 auto hits with a maximum of 8. Now, of course, there's always the add chance that you'll have incredibly horrible luck and roll all ones and only do 1 auto hit per model. But yeah, you're not likely to do that. And as a veteran player once told me when I first started, the more saves you can force your opponent to have to take, the better off for you, because likelihood is the more saves they have to take, the more often they're likely to fail those saves too. Especially when the Pyroblaster starts at a strength 5 against something like, say, Tormagants that have a toughness of 2, meaning that you'll wound on about 90% of your hits on a 2-up. With their 5-up save, they're likely to end up only saving about 20% of whatever you throw at them. Meaning that the Infernus squad can essentially mop up weak characters with low armor. Pretty good for a bunch of little skirmishers. Instead, the cool thing about the Intercessors is they actually provide a bit more oomph. The average standard weapon for your tactical squad is going to just be a standard bolt gun, which fires twice and gives you at a +3 ballistic skill with a strength 4. Now, when you're dealing with damage on the game, of course, strength versus toughness is going to be what's going to determine what you have to roll for to actually hurt the target. If the strength is the same as the toughness, then you're rolling 4 on a 4 or higher, so you're only going to wound that person at least half the time. Arguably, for example, a squad of heavy intercessors, yes, they move a little slower at 5 instead of 6 inches, but they also have the heavy and assault traits with their heavy bolt rifle, which means in the new edition, with 10th edition, if they stayed still, instead of hitting on 3s, they're hitting on 2s. Their heavy bolt rifles are also strength 5, and they have AP 1. Which means you're more likely to wound, and you're also more likely to make your opponent fail their saves. And if you have them sitting on an objective marker, that means that they're hitting on 2s, which means they're going to hit at least 90% of the time. And with 2 attacks each, and if you give one a heavy bolter, you're looking at least 21 dice a turn to throw at somebody. Which means you're going to hit them at least 15 to 16 times each turn. With strength 5, and most opponents' force is going to be either toughness 3 or toughness 4, if they're not Necrons or some heavier armored unit like Space Marines, you're going to do a lot of damage. Plus, with the AP1, even if they have some heavier armor, let's say you're fighting against other Space Marines, their 3-up save now goes to a 4-up, meaning that they're only saving half their save, the wounds that you throw at them. And in a game like Warhammer, in which there are 2 victory standards, either getting victory points by holding objectives and completing objectives, or just tabling your opponent, which is simply just wiping out all their models, having something that can not only ding the opponent back hard as much as you're getting, while being able to stand on that objective is going to be pretty important. The tougher you make it for your opponent to be able to take out your squad, while also being able to dish out as much pain to take out theirs so they have less damage against you, is pretty relevant. And trust me, I've been playing a while. God, that's an old codex. I've played Dark Angels, I've played Space Marine, I've played Astra Militarum. But basically, what you're going to want to do is figure out how you want to build your army. Now, a good thing, too, I would also recommend is watching battle reports, too. battle reports are a great way of figuring out what units you might be interested in, how they perform on the table, so on and so forth. Now, I know that there's probably more than a few older players and veteran players like me who are shaking their fists at me right now. How dare you talk crap about Tactical Marines? Look, sorry, new guys, but let me have my little rant here for a second. Look, I understand if you're grandfathering in an old armory, why you would want to have the ability to play your Tactical Marines. I get it. But if you're first starting out, trying to force the new guys to play with old models that don't perform as well in the game is kind of just mean. Like, don't get me wrong, I understand if you're a new guy and you bought some old models off of somebody that was getting out. Look, nothing against you. But I would actually recommend, again, getting your codex, looking at what better options you have, and then slowly phasing out those older models with some newer ones. This isn't being mean, and I'm not a GW shill. I'm just a person that's kind of being practical. Look, you can still play with those old models if you just happen to like the look of them. But if you're going to play to, let's say, do something competitive, you're going to want to check out your codex. You're going to want to look at what the stats of the units are, what they can do, and kind of figure out, okay, well, maybe I don't want to play with some of the older kits because they're not as good. One of my personal examples that I would bring up is the old Space Marine transport staple of the Rhino. Personally, I don't like Rhinos. From an old gameplay standard, they just weren't good at all. Rhinos are the staple for the basic Space Marine transport. But gameplay-wise, the thing was always weak. Hell, the Astra Militarum transport was stronger than the Space Marine transport. And it really didn't get much better. If you don't believe me, I'll show you. Take a look at this. This stat block right here that I'm showing you is the stat block for the standard Rhino from this edition. This is back when Rhinos and vehicles all ran on different variations of armor sides. Now, 11 is when it comes to armor. And even worse was that when it came to the old Astra Militarum Chimera, I'm going to be honest, I'd much rather the Astra Militarum Chimera as a transport than a Rhino. Now, this is probably because I'm a little bit of a military brat. My dad served in the military. I've had military in my family for quite some time. But when I'm looking at a transport, I'm going to want some kind of fire support while it's around. More importantly, I want that transport to be able to survive and actually be a problem for the opponent. The problem with the Rhino is the most equipment and armament it could have was a Stormbolter, which is this. This thing in his hand is a Stormbolter. That was the most armament you had on a Rhino. Meaning, at most, it could shoot twice and not really do a whole lot. A lot of my experience with Rhinos is that a lot of times they got destroyed off the battlefield turn one. Turn one being destroyed off the map kind of defeats the purpose of having a transport. Considering the whole point of putting a unit in a transport is to get them across the battlefield quickly and as safely as possible. when your transport can be essentially knocked out turn one by a stiff breeze, that defeats the purpose. And no, it didn't get better. As I can show you in this index. Oh my god, where did they put this stuff? It's been so long since I've seen this. And this, by the way, the interesting about this one is they actually released this as an interim uh, codex supplement, basically, right when I think 9th edition first came out, and there was like no codexes anymore. So they made you get one of these. And then if you wanted like an actual codex, you had to wait for the codex to come out. I think it's kind of hilarious that this lasted like A's and one edition. I feel bad for whoever bought that. That's sad. I'm not trying to make fun of you guys, but dang. It looks cool. Kind of. Where the heck? Oh, there we go. Wow, I forgot they even just had a Rhino Primaris. Dude, that's eh. But yeah, the Rhino still didn't get much better in 9th edition. Toughness 7, wounds 10. Yep, same old Stormbolter. Did they improve this edition? I doubt it. In fact, I'm pretty sure they didn't. Oh, no. I'm sorry. They slightly improved it. It's now toughness 9. And they gave it 10 wounds. It still only has a Stormbolter and a 100 killer missile, though. I'm sorry. Look, I'm never not going to basically just like this thing. And for the most part, like they gave it an additional 2 models that you could put in it, but it can't transport Jetpack, Wolfen, Phobos, Gravis, Centurion, Terminator. Well, the Terminator is kind of normal, or Tacticus. And Tacticus is like most of your new models for infantry. I'm sorry, at this point, yeah, the Rhino is essentially just left there as a legacy for players that have been playing Space Marine for a long time, and they've had it for like 20 years. The Rhino has never really been a great transport to use. Personally, I've always preferred Razorbacks as a transport because back in the day, you either had a Rhino, a Razorback, or one of these. And this one I actually bought secondhand from somebody. But one of these brand new is $100. $100. This thing. Brand new. I paid like 20 for mine because it was secondhand, but still. Brand new. $100. Rhinos were relatively cheap. Same with Razorbacks. Rhino was like $40. Razorback about 50. They're a bit more now. But for transports with the new edition, I'm definitely going to say that yes, I know some people will try and again crucify me, but I would definitely prefer that and say that you should probably go with the repulsor or an impulsor, which honestly, yeah, I would go with the repulsor instead. Because weirdly enough, the funny thing I find hilarious is that the repulsor carries 12 and the impulsor only carries 6. But the repulsor actually has more armament, meaning more fire support. Like it actually has a las talon, or you can twip it with a twin heavy bolter or twin las cannon, or an onslaught gatling cannon. So, a little bit more oomph. And it has a lot higher toughness, it has more wounds. Yes, it's more expensive than a rhino because I think a rhino is like a measly 40 points. But it's one of those things where it's like you get what you paid for, basically. As I look it up real quick. Oh, oh, that's sad. 75 points. Actually, I remember an edition where you could actually get a rhino with your tactical squad for free. They really wanted to sell you that rhino. Yes, in today's game, if you wanted to buy it directly from GW, a lot of that's going to be expensive. I'm going to tell you right now, yes, this game is going to make your wallet cry, especially if you're first starting out and you're first new. But here's the thing, you don't have to pay GW retail prices. GW actually sells their own models on Amazon for less. You can also find some on Walmart Marketplace as well. I've got some Hellblasters that I bought on there for like $53 compared to the 60 some 65 on the Games Workshop site. Now, pardon me as I wet my whistle, as I'm feeling my mouth is a bit dry from all this talking. Delicious. Now, you can do that route. You can also go secondhand and go to your local game store. You can find plenty of Warhammer people there. Maybe you can even get them to pawn off some armies that they're no longer wanting to play. And like I said, that's a cheap way of getting into the hobby. It's a really good way. Now, personally, if you're just wanting to start out with Space Marines, a starter kit's a great way to go with that. Go halvesies with somebody that's looking for some space bugs. There you go. I actually got my starter pack, my starter kit for like 105 off Walmart Marketplace. Again, a good place to go and check and see if you can find some models cheap. Now, keep in mind, be mindful of who you're buying off of, whether it's Amazon or the Walmart Marketplace. So make sure to check and see what the seller reviews are before you purchase. But that's just good advice in general if you're buying online from a second or third party. And like I said, once you actually figure out what your army you want is, you spend the money, you build it up. For the most part with this game, you're actually not going to be spending a whole lot more money unless they come out with a new edition, which you need another one of these. But the great thing is, with Warhammer, surprisingly enough, is editions don't change that often, except maybe once every 5 or 10 years. So really, once you get your army built, you're pretty good. And for a lot of the older players that are always complaining, oh, but I gotta buy new models, Look, guys, be glad you're not playing Magic the Gathering, okay? Could you imagine if you had to buy new models every 3 months? Just having to not even to buy new models, having to rebuild your whole army every 3 months. God, we'd be bankrupt. GW would be out of money just to the fact that their players are broke beyond unbelief. Because the players would just not be able to buy anything, so they wouldn't make any money. But that's my opinion. That's kind of my little short-term guide in terms of buying kits and models and getting into this hobby at first. There's a lot of other cool things. If you're really looking to the lore, I would suggest looking into the Black Library, and there are several different channels that go into that. Personally, I've never really been to the Black Library. I've just played the game and played the video games and enjoyed the lore from those. I've also seen plenty of clips from various other channels on YouTube that talk about different lore. So if you guys want to learn more about that, I would recommend looking them up and taking a good look at it. Anyway, this has been your buddy Isaac, signing off, and I'll see you next time.